Hello everyone, and welcome to the sixth of the artist-led talks organized by the Yunus Emre Institute of London, exploring the arts and crafts of Turkey. We're delighted to be back after a short break in this Zoom talk series, featuring some renowned artists. I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Zeynep. I'm an architect. I've been moderating some of these talks since it started. If you would like to listen to previous talks, you can have a look at Yunus Emre's YouTube channel. Today we have a very talented speaker, Adam Williamson. To introduce him briefly, Adam is a specialist in biomorphic art, also a skilled calligrapher and a geometer and sculptor. He's admirably skilled in many different art disciplines. He's been commissioned by prestigious institutions and clients, including the Prince of Wales, Oxford University, and Shakespeare's Globe London. He has given workshops, presentations, and public lectures at many of the leading cultural and educational institutions in the UK and beyond, and he continues to do so. It's a pleasure for me to welcome him, also because I learned biomorphic art from him. So it is nice to join again in an educational platform. To give a brief overview about today's talk, there will be two parts of it. In the first part, Adam will be presenting his work, and in the second part, there will be a Q&A session. If you have any questions, type into the chat box, please. You can also ask through Facebook, I think Twitter or Instagram accounts, basically the social media accounts. All questions will be directed to us. Okay, I will hand over now to Adam, to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Zainab. And it's a real pleasure to link up again and to be with this foundation and be talking to you all live. I'm just slipping my slides around because I was going to give a little talk about Islamic art, but I think I'll try to talk about myself first, which is a rarity these days. Okay. Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and I'm also thank you for your team for hooking me up on Instagram. So hello there if you're watching me live. This is my first little Insta live experience. So before further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and I always like to start my classes and lectures and sharings with a little quote by my teacher, Keith Critchlow, who moved on to heavenly realms earlier in the year. He was a teacher of Zainab too, and many of us. He started the Princess School of Traditional Arts, and before any ceremony or which is how I describe his classes, he would light a candle and start with this little intention for the session. So may we all be guided by truth, may we have beauty revealed to us, and may it result in the good. So this is Keith, and he's part of his own little traditional lineage. This is Keith with Buckminster Fuller, who's famous for his geodesic domes. Keith started the Princess School of Traditional Arts, and I'd heard about the school when I was a youngster studying calligraphy and illumination. I'd heard about this mythical place for many people, and eventually I decided just to go and sit in on the interview, even though I was only sort of 18-year-old and way too young to be doing the MA or the or a PhD, or I had no qualifications. But when I went in, Keith was this incredibly gracious figure who I wasn't really necessarily aware of. I was just aware of the institute, and he conducted the whole interview with his arm around my shoulder. And he was very interested in my work. And by the end of me muttering away incoherently, he said, "Oh, we've got to set up some sort of artist residency for you." So I ended up staying at the Prince School for about 4 years, just working, taking on commissions, and learning from all these incredible tutors who passed through, and really all under the kind of guise and input of Keith, who for me brought all of these elements that I was interested in, into one avenue, in one stream. He really connected me to that golden thread. He, through sacred geometry, his initial talk that I heard, I remember sitting in the lecture hall, and it was as if someone had just pulled down, opened all the windows, pulled up all the blinds, and this light flooded in. The way he combined all these disparate interests, or seemingly disparate interests that I had: geometry, craft, philosophy, spirituality, discipline, your life's journey, love, all of these things he seemed to bring together in just his manner. I really feel like when you're learning from craftsmen and masters, it's a transmission, and it's almost like it's a form of osmosis. And more than the technical skills that they pass on to you, it's really more about being in their presence, being in their grace. And when you're in the grace of these masters, you receive that transmission. And it could be a form of inspiration. It could be some form of baraka, but what I find is most important when you sit at the feet of masters is that you're connected to that sinsila. So I know in the Turkish tradition, they have, in the Turkish Sufi tradition, they have a very strong sinsila through tariqas, and in antiquity, the workshops and ateliers were also related to the Sufi tariqas. So you'd have the combination of your craft master also being your spiritual master, and your training being a spiritual training of discipline and respect, adab, and all of these elements. So while it wasn't maybe as formulaic as that, just being with Keith taught me a lot of these elements, and it was so rewarding, because I'd sort of been blindly following this path, and he really just showed me how this was a path that many had followed, and it was very clear. So he's a very inspirational character for me. So I've been interested in carving, pattern, for many years. I was completely overwhelmed when I visited the Alhambra Palace. This is actually in Morocco. This is in the Atrian Madrasa, but very similar style. And I wanted to learn more, but I also really treasure that moment when I first went into the Alhambra Palace, because it was as if I was floating around, and I saw it as a layman, as it should be seen. These sacred buildings, sacred sanctuaries, are there to create a connection to the divine. They're there to illuminate us and draw us out of our ego into sort of a higher realm. And now when I go into these places, I kind of nerd out, and I understand all the symmetries and the grids, and I'm taking people around and sort of almost showing them the secrets behind the magic trick. But I really treasure those first moments when I went to these sacred spaces, the Alhambra, the Sulaimaniya Madrasa, the Hagia Sophia, Esfahan, the Shah Jahan, the Ludwala. All of these incredible masterpieces inspired me and made me want to learn more. So this is me, actually not quite a youngster, but but this was the beginning, really, the genesis for I'm jumping forward a little bit. I might go back to my training later, but this is an image from Fez and with my colleague Sama. These travels and journeys and interests in pattern led me to study with Keith, and he opened my eyes to Islamic art, which eventually led me to start a practice called Art of Islamic Pattern, with my colleague Richard Henry, and we've been running this for over 10 years now, and spend most of our time we have a gong here, the dinner gong. So after the gong, so I began with my colleague Richard Henry to carry out a series of recce's to these incredible monuments, with the idea to take students on these study trips. And Art of Islamic Patterns were a very organic arrival at this kind of organization that we have. It's sort of almost like a community. We've been traveling to Morocco, Spain, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, all these incredible places, bringing students pretty much until this situation we found ourselves in this year, continuously. And it's such a privilege to be able to bring people to these spaces and to open them up and introduce them to all of this ancient knowledge. When you're studying these patterns, it's a very meditative process that you go through, but achieving this within an environment where these patterns are surrounding you, the knowledge of these ancient malams, masters are there watching over, is a really transformative experience, and spend a whole week together, which is what we often do on these study trips, really brings out all of these incredible experiences. So very much looking forward to starting our trips again, maybe next year. But this is an image of some of the work we do, and this is a particular drop pattern that we're working on right here, from the Atrin Madrasa. So we, as I said, we work all over. We also visit many places like New York and Sydney and Dubai, spreading this knowledge that we've been gracious enough to receive from our teachers. These are some of the locations we try to find. So again, this is Dar Safrin, good friends of ours. So all the places that we work are locations that sort of arrive very spontaneously. For example, in Istanbul, which many of you will obviously be familiar with, we were looking for a venue for a whole week, and looked at many places in Galata and in the historic parts. And then we finally kind of given up, and we thought, oh, we'll just go to Sakula Mehmet Pasha, this, beautiful Sinan mosque, which is overlooking the Bosphorus. And on leaving Sakula Mehmet Pasha, we were discussing with each other, where was this Istanbul Design Center? Had anyone heard about it? Or yeah, we'd all kind of heard about it. And then we look up and we're standing outside the Istanbul Design Center, and we knock on the door, and in that beautiful, gracious Ottoman hospitality, His Rev invited us in, even though he said he had no space for us for any classes. So but by the end of our chai ceremony, he was ready to welcome us in, and yeah, like 5 teas later, we're best friends, and we've been running trips there for about 7 years. So many of these locations, the same sort of stories arrived with Dar Safrin, where we're working here, that we have these beautiful partners everywhere we go. So privileged to work with them. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about myself now, and my journey. I started out as a calligrapher and a sign writer. So I left home at 16 and decided I can only paint and draw. I'm a creative, but I'm not in any way an academic. So what can I do? And I worked as a sign writer, painting shop signs, and I learned at various colleges all these intricate gilding and marbling effects, and then I went on to study calligraphic forms at Reigate. And in the meantime, in the weekends, I was a searcher. So I was working for cobblers in the train station, or I would go and study letter carving in Wales. I was traveling, looking for masters on the road, hitching around Morocco, and constantly looking for knowledge and more strings to my bow, and wanting to understand how these craft processes work and how people could paint a perfect zouak biomorphic form on a table in Morocco. So I'd sit watching little children. There used to be little children who'd paint them. Yeah, that was really my journey before I met Keith. Some of these journeys we documented. So this is quite fun. When we were in Morocco, no, this is in Malaysia rather. I went to study with Nurhaiz and Nuruddin biomorphic forms from Southeast Asia, and also wood carving techniques. And we filmed it in a very gonzo way. Me and a few friends joined me, and we had all sorts of adventures outside of my wood carving practices. We searched for sort of spiritual leaders and witch doctors and all kinds of forms that were related to the wood carving process, but all in search of this golden thread, this knowledge. So I continued this sort of sign painting skills into my biomorphic learning. This is a painting myself and Latifa Spiker did. It's a whole series of murals in West London. Oh no, this is in East London. This is in Liverpool Street in Kenza restaurant. Kenza just means treasure. And this is another example of some work which I thought would be quite relevant to you guys. So I worked after studying calligraphy and sign writing as a letter carver. So I got more into letter forms and stone carving. And I worked as a letter carver for about 5 or 6 years in varying degrees of complexity. So these are some projects that might interest you. This was a carving of Martin Ling's tombstone. May he rest in peace. And he's a very important person to myself. So it was a real honor to be asked to carve this stone in his memory.
Such an
Martin Ling.
Adam, I didn't know about this. Was he teaching at Prince's School when you were in as well? Like, were you at the same time at Prince's School?
I think he'd ended. He gave a lecture. I think I went to see a lecture of his there. But I knew Martin Lings before I went to the Prince's School. Okay. I was studying illumination, and I had a lot of books by Martin Lings. I'd heard about him. So we were a written communication. He would send me his books. We had some phone calls. And he was very pivotal in my introduction to biomorphic art and arabesque and Islamic art. But I think I don't think you'd mind me telling you this story, which was quite profound for us, because this stone is very heavy. This is maybe 2 meters by meters. It's a huge, big, heavy stone. I had all this specialist equipment to carry it in to his resting place, and 4 or 5 of my, or maybe 4 friends of mine who were very strong. I didn't necessarily pick my friends for their sort of spiritual qualities. I picked them for their brawn. And this will have relevance in a moment to this story. We had this special equipment. We moved the stone into place, and we were all carrying it. Many people around, really heavy stone, and we were struggling. And as we got over the grave site, the stone suddenly became completely light. And all my friends, everyone was looking at each other in disbelief. It was a bit of a miracle, and then we just laid the stone in place, and everyone sort of backed off in reverence.
Such a beautiful insight that you shared. Thank you.
Yeah, and then there was. Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Okay, I might just carry on. So other sort of carvings from that period of note were, I also carved a memorial for the Queen Mother, which involved lots of intricacies like knotwork and Celtic corgis and various elements which were which are demanded of me. I don't often carve like pictorial work, but as it was a royal commission, I made a little bit of a special. This is another project in collaboration with Keith Critchlow. This is the gates of St. Ethelburga's, which was a church that was unfortunately blown up by the IRA, but rebuilt using all the remnants from the building. So there's a friend of mine, Helen White, rebuilt the stained glass windows using all the shards. We built the gateway, and this is an incredible place for everyone should visit. It's open to all, and it's a kind of multi-faith church. All religions can practice there. This is another piece. So my parents were Sufi, and they both lived for a long time in Turkey and northern Cyprus, and so I grew up being read Rumi and Hafez, Turkish, Iranian, Farsi poets, Attar, all of the Sufi greats. So they sort of feed into my work quite often, and it's nice to be able to spread this this knowledge and wisdom through my artwork if I can. So this is with an element of a Rumi poem. So this element, learn from the lame Jumi goat and lead the herd home, for me always express this idea of everyone being in a rush. So as a craftsman, especially back in that period, spent a long time just carving, sitting in front of a stone, working with the brush. As you'll know, Zainab, you know, as an illuminator, and an architect, there's so much time just spent there, and the world is spinning around you as you're just in this quiet space. And this idea that, you know, all the goats and the herd are rushing down to the stream to, you know, to run after this sort of capitalist ideals and materialism and Maya. But eventually they're all going to have to return. Everyone has to return home. And often it's the lame, dreamy ones that are at the back that end up leading us up. So that was the inspiration behind this piece. These are some other pieces from back then. This was in my early 20s, all of these sculptural works. So I made a whole series of sculptures over that period, looking at tessellating repeat units. So they're based on universal geometry, can be related to Islamic geometry, but looking at the architectural forms behind them and how they can be interpreted in 3 dimension and using natural materials. But I love this piece because the analysis was by Burgoyne, and it's using a series of interlocking circles. So if you were to look at this pattern as a whole, there are a series of giant circles all overlaid, and those circles then create these beautiful little swastikas inside, and these roulette triangles, all my favorite shapes. This is another one, really just having fun with these tessellating forms, and this is now in Dubai, in the Aloft reception area. This is another piece for the Cambridge, what is it called? It's Tim Winter's Cambridge Academy, Cambridge College. Yeah, again, it's a collaboration with a friend, Jamie, stained glass artist, and we were working with traditional leading and cut glass geometric patterns. Quite nice work. It's quite nice working with these forms, working with both traditional Western materials in the leading, and then more Eastern patterns, because usually these patterns in Turkey, for example, they'd be made using cast plaster with around clay and cast glass. So these are some other examples of projects I work on, sort of sculptural benches. These are I used to quite enjoy them because they, in this case, I was working with a school, and all the school children were getting involved, and I was also, tasked to create something that benches that didn't touch anything around them. So they had these skylights, but they couldn't touch the skylights. So I had to work with compression. These are all just the same repeat unit, but they work on these compression rings. And then we sort of had these additional rolled steel creepers for plant life and to grow on. So now the whole thing is completely overrun with plants. These are some other examples of sculptures in here. And then alongside all the trips that I've been running with Richard and personal trips, I also run a lot of outreach workshops for the Princess School of Traditional Arts, some of which were incredible experiences. So this was a project that ran over a year, and I was working with the Native American or the First Nation community in California, in Canada, in a really remote part of British Columbia, and I was tasked with just celebrating their traditions and showing how they are connected to sacred traditions across the world, and just finding projects that can manifest that. In this case, we decided to build a geodesic dome, and we also carved a whole series of walkways through the forest. But the whole experience, I learned way more than the students. I feel I was interviewing a lot of the elders when I was there, and just seeing how a culture that is, connected to its tradition, even though it's very it's connected by the smallest thread, but it's pretty much one of the few traditions that really have this untapped connection, and especially to nature. All of the practices that they go through, there's a ceremony involved. For example, if they were to carve a canoe, they would go out into the forest. They would make sure the tree had nothing living in it or any animals close by. They would speak to the tree. They would camp there for a few days, and then when the tree gave permission, they would take it down and then build a canoe in the orientation of the tree in that environment, and then take it out. And the whole thing was done with such ceremony. They still had coming of age potlatches for the children. The ancestors were called. The connection with the mythology was real. So, for example, if they were speaking about the thunderbird, the mythical whales, they would actually point out places where these things existed. So it's an incredible experience, and the way that they related that to craft really helped me on my journey. For example, in Malaysia, they had similar approaches to wood that you'd find in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, you'd find similar approaches that you would in Canada, even though these traditions weren't connected. And it's this reverence for wood, this idea that this growth, they're surrounded by this life-giving material, and the growth flowed through it. And they would both see that growth and that movement through the grain of the wood as a form of a vital force, like a prana, or they call it semangat in Malaysia. And working with that vital force, you're sort of you're connected to the divine, so to the love, you could say. And as a wood carver and a carver of many materials, I really understood this on a sort of practical level. If you're working with the grain, with the flow of the universe, with this, they call it in the Native American tradition or the First Nation tradition, the spirit that flows through things. You cut smoothly, you have a beautiful peel from your chisel. You're not working against the grain. And this is very much key things that should be passed on to any student. The technical elements, hold your chisel at this angle, the brush at this, the pen nib, these are the tools you should use, blah, blah, blah. You introduce these elements, these are the structures. Those can all be introduced very quickly over a few weeks. But the discipline, the reverence for the material, the inspiration, the fire that you need, you master these disciplines, and for them to become a kind of lifelong pursuit, and to really honor them and take them to the next level. These are the key teachings that you need. Okay. I'd also like to mention a little bit about what's been happening this year. So after all these trips and students that we've met in person, I guess we built quite a bit of a community, and we didn't really find this out until the lockdowns occurred. So back in the springtime, when we had a lockdown, we ended up going online, I'd say. So like opening up to a wider audience before we'd really worked only with people, I guess, who could afford to come with us or happened to be in a city that we visited. As soon as we went online, and I initially made a lot of these classes all free or by donation, so anyone could join, we realized that we had this huge community, although there's a huge appetite for this knowledge, these sacred forms, this meditative process, and we had an incredible experience running these classes. Many people joining, and once we got over this strange format of speaking through the computer and sharing this wisdom, the outcomes were incredible. Had these otherworldly artworks. So these are some of the paintings. I just picked a handful from classes that we'd had in the lockdown. So I'd teach a class. I was teaching classes maybe at least twice a week, all throughout lockdown. And we just get the basic drawing elements done. And then people would go away and paint them and decorate them and carve them in these incredible forms. And I have like maybe 2,000 images that people have sent me or I've collected from these classes, which I'm now, with the help of many people, putting into a book called Profound Patterns, with a bit of a how-to and description of the process. So Zainab, I'm not sure, I could talk and talk and talk. Would you like to ask questions, or would you like me to speak a little bit about Islamic art?
We've got a couple of questions coming through, actually. If you want, we can just move on to that as well. When you were talking about, by the way, to your online classes, I think you're signing to the header. Yeah, you mentioned that you got some incredible outcomes also through online classes. I know some people are asking about that. One moment. A few people are asking, is it possible to have this master-student relationship through online classes, for example?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, we always disagreed with that possibility, and we were very strict in not going online until we had this outbreak, and I've just been very surprised. I think that it's a different process online. I think that we've kind of set people off on their own personal journeys, and given them the tools for that. And it's just very strange times where there's not an expectation to fulfill or to go out. So there's suddenly all this time which will enable people to practice and paint. Can this be transmitted? Can we have this transition? Yeah, I think we can. I mean, looking at the artwork, I feel certainly that people have the spirit and the motivation. So I think it is possible. Yeah. I mean, literally just hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned it, but I feel like the results speak for themselves.
I mean, there's a good part of it, I guess, although it's a very strange time and some of the time it's boring not being able to meet people outside one-to-one, have these classes. Maybe one of the reasons why the outcomes were so good might be that the world slowed down and people maybe had time to just contemplate what they are doing. I don't know.
I think you're right. because my feeling was always that, especially with any form, that there is a little bit of a dance. There's a display. So when you're watching someone work, it's the way that they position their body, the movement of the hand, as well as there being like a kind of energy exchange. And just watching when they take the pencil from you and work on your work and correct things, whether they're being a little bit more aggressive with it, and or whether they're being more subtle and gentle, you know, immediately you can get these cues which you can't get online, especially when you have very large numbers. So I think, yeah, the results are probably more of a result of people having to learn for themselves, which ultimately I think is the best way, because a lot of these forms are archetypal shapes. So the archetypal forms, we're not like a modernist contemporary artist collective where we're trying to react to anything or respond or create something new or inflammatory. We're trying to create beauty. We're like searching for beauty, and in these art forms we can find them. They're reflecting nature. They're trying to emulate the profound and the divine. So in that search, we kind of all know the end goal, you know, like within the golden proportion, we all understand its beauty. So eventually we'll all arrive there with enough work and time and discipline. And if people are willing to do that in their own time without any hints and nudges and guides and displays, then that's great. I'm so happy.
I agree with that. So I guess we are all trying to do our best during these strange times. And I know you've been quite busy still running all your classes. So we have another question from Nadia. How can one be mastered in such traditional arts, which is basically associated with Muslims, when you're not even Muslim? I'm a big fan. I need advice.
Can you say that one more time? How can I just missed the key point?
I'm not sure. If someone is not Muslim, how can she or he be basically associated with such art?
Well, I think that Martin Lings put it very well, that we are almost all like, we're all on the circumference of the circle, and we're all like radii going to the same place. So we all have our different journeys, but there's no reason why we can't be touched by the grace of other cultures, and that's all part of people's journey. I think if you were brought up in a certain place with certain rules and rituals, that's no reason why you're privileged in obtaining this knowledge, and no one else been accessible to it. And if you think about, if we're speaking about Islamic art, this is something that spread throughout all these cultures and sort of assimilated and worked as a syncretic practice. So when you go deeper and deeper, there's a reason why we have all these different regional styles within Islamic art. It's not all the same. It's because they're absorbing ancient traditions that are already existing. It could be in Malaysia, Hindu, Aboriginal. There's a lot of Aboriginal work in Malaysia, Buddhist forms, and they all work together. For a long time in Malaysia, the call to prayer was with drums, these big drums. And slowly these things are adapted. So, the Seljuks from Central Asia in Turkey, the Mamluks also from Central Asia, the Berber tribesmen, they're all absorbing this knowledge, but they're also bringing their own, you look at what happened in Spain with all this confluence of ideas with the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims, all this Morisco artwork. You'd be hard pressed to say this was created only by, a select religion. So it can't be claimed in that way either. It should be shared, and hopefully everyone's in a generous mood.
I guess if we think about this traditional art in general, mostly it all has a universal language. And I guess you're talking about the main idea comes from previous movement. What I would say is, like in Islamic art, there are certain forms and symbols, even though the content is different, it kind of reflects into symbols and forms. Maybe it changes in different regional places. It's somehow all relates to each other. Yeah, you can still relate to it even though you're not a Muslim. And once you start practicing, it brings you the message. Maybe that's kind of the content of that form.
Yeah, well, I would say that there would be maybe different levels of understanding, but for me, I find that the difference is, like, you have sacred art and profane art. And so I don't make any divisions between different religions necessarily, apart from just in a descriptive way. But for me, there's like sacred art, the intention is to venerate and the divine, and to work in as a humble vehicle. And profane is more like feeding the ego and the lower self. So I would just make these differentiations, and then you have regional styles and different religious approaches. But the same thing, for me, if you go to a Gothic cathedral, and the way that everyone worked together to create this thing, not for any material reward. They were just, no one had their name to anything. It was purely the craft, and the work was their prayer.
Mm-hmm. There are quite a few people asking about your experience in Turkey, for example, which cities in Anatolia you visited, and what was your thoughts about Turkey.
Well, I love Turkey, and Istanbul especially. I would like to travel more. I went there a lot as a child, and I can't quite remember where I was, because I was just being taken around by my dad, sometimes on the back of a motorbike. and I have lots of great friends there. I've been to Konya to work, to research the Iznik tiles. I mean, I've been to Iznik rather to research the tile making there, and a few cities around the area, and all those beautiful hot springs. I obviously also went to Konya and Cappadocia, and had to go to Rumi's tomb. And I do have a funny story where it wasn't me, but my friend. He went to Rumi's tomb quite a while ago, and he was dressed all in these robes, right? He's Malaysian, but he had a turban and like all these cloaks and stuff. And he was doing a prayer by the tomb, but he got really tired and fell asleep on the floor. And then the cleaner came around like later in the night or something, or the security guard, and shined the torch on the tomb. And then he jumped up like, what's going on? And the security guard's like, Maulana. And fell on his knees. And so yeah, my friend Arifin. So I really enjoyed Konya, really special place, and Shams's tomb, and we were walking on the street and got pulled into some Mevlevi ritual, drumming and whirling, and spent like hours there. So a very special place. I just I mean, I often contemplated living in Turkey, and my colleague Richard lived in Turkey, and it's for me, it's really that it's a fantastic place, because Istanbul itself, obviously, it's always been a meeting place between the East and the West. And I found that there was just this perfect balance between the for me anyway, I know that, I don't know all the politics and what's happening there, but as a visitor, that my feeling from my upbringing and my experiences was it felt quite like home, because a lot of the young people, they were quite secular, but they all had, I imagine this is what you'd feel in India too, this kind of connection to they had a particular adab, particular reverence, like for their elders and for craft, and the sort of the passion that they had is something that I could really relate to. So even people who looked outwardly secular still had like a spiritual like element to them, which is something that was, you never really know in the West. But there was just like the perfect meeting point of East and West. So I really enjoy it. Hopefully one day I'll live in Istanbul for a while.
Do you have plans to run more workshops in Istanbul?
Oh, of course, yeah. And my friend had an apartment in Kadıköy. I used to love that area, all the back streets and the cobble street people playing guitar, and you could just spark up a conversation. I always remember when I was in Turkey with my dad, we were driving around some city and we stopped at the traffic lights, and then someone served us tea, like in the traffic lights. There's always time. There's always time for tea.
Okay, lots of questions. It's difficult for me to pick one. Okay, there's a nice comment from Nariman. I would love to see a collaboration between care homes and hospitals to do workshops like that to help people through going through a hard time by doing such fine art. They will be definitely from it.
Yeah, this is a great idea, and this is actually something that I did once. I did a series of carvings which involved workshops for the mentally ill, and in these care homes. It was actually up in the north of England, around Blackpool. I remember doing some geometry with a group, and there were all sorts of issues, but we managed to make it work. And some of them were really difficult because I would enter the institute and I couldn't bring any of my tools in because they're all dangerous, like compasses and stuff. I'd go with all my workshop prepared and all my kit and my bags, and they're like, no, leave it all at the door. And I had to just go in and just make up workshops with paper and folding or whatever. I can't remember. But one time we did this workshop, and the carer, the nurse, came up to me afterwards. She said, "Oh, that boy, he'd had a psychotic episode, and if he just that half an hour of concentration and working with the geometry, she'd never seen him stop for that long. He's like manic all the time." And she said, from that half an hour, he will now be at peace for the rest of the day. And I always remember that. And I just thought, wow, this is really powerful stuff. I have to find a way to continue this, but I'm just going with the flow, so I haven't got back to that yet.
Okay, it's jumping into something else, but so someone say, hello, do you think there is a scientific part in this kind of art, specifically mathematical? And if so, what is percentage of its presence, and is it more significant than in other forms of art? So basically, the scientific part into work.
Yeah, well, I'll explain that, and I'll show you some slides quickly to explain that. So this is a piece from, this is a 12-fold piece, piece from Rüstem Pasha, and this is a radial pattern. This is from Istanbul, and there are lots of these radial patterns in Islamic art. So this is a Mamluk frontispiece from, it's Mamluk, but it's probably made by a Persian artist based in Cairo. And this is an example of how reverence would be used within the composition of a frontispiece. So this is a medallion with 6 medallions around the center. And this is a pattern which many Islamic patterns are, which is infinitely tessellating. But the reason they crop the outer medallions and stars is so that the pattern is not enclosing the Quran. So this is showing that it's the center of something infinitely tessellating. There are these subtle concepts that are inputted into the artwork. So I'm just going to skip through these. This could be another example. We can talk about numerology. This is from the Lutfala Mosque in Esfahan, very famous dome, and it's composed using a series of dynamic squares, so static dynamics, subdivided squares, and then the number of shamsas which is in this dome. And I have a really beautiful example of it I'll show you in a moment, which has just been painted by Rohana. There are 32 rings, and there are 9 levels. Obviously there are 9, and then you get back to the return to the first. So 32 times 9 plus the very center is 289, which is the Abjad value. Abjad is the old cosmic numerology system, which is used. So Abba, Jah were the first 3 letters of the Arabic alphabet. So this is the sacred numerology within this tradition. So they equate to the Abjad value of Al-Rahim, the merciful, which is also the root for womb. And obviously this is a cupola dome form, and this is also a mosque that was only used by females, by women. So there are these secret codes that are inputted into the artwork. We also counted the number of windows in that mosque, which added up to Nur, which is light. And these are some examples of that dome, of that mosque. This is from Ari, and then this is a recent one from a few days ago from Rohana. You can see those shamsas. This is obviously on a flat form, but really bringing out that reverence. Obviously, there are many different applications for within sacred geometry, from the golden proportion, the silver proportion, to the Fibonacci sequence, all influencing the way these forms are produced, and also facades are divided up. We could talk a lot about that.
Thanks, Adam. There's a lovely, question actually from Raihana. You've been instrumental in our growth as artists. I'm wondering what helps and inspires you to continue to develop your craft.
Oh, well, firstly, you guys inspire me to continue teaching with all this beautiful artwork, really taking it to the next level. For example, on those Zoom classes, I was only going to do a couple of free classes. And when I started seeing this kind of artwork and the responses, it was really humbling, and that's what made me continue. As far as my own artwork, I started off really just enjoying the kind of safety and being submerged into this craft. So I felt like when I was drawing or carving, I would almost pray for a kind of like a really long 6-month project. I mean, it would probably be like a jail sentence to a lot of people, but just to be stuck in front of a piece of wood or paper, just working on one project. And I would just go deeper and deeper and deeper into it, and not want to be disturbed, and just be in that zone. And I think that was my kind of journeyman period. All my 20s, I was working like that and looking for those kind of projects. I was a bit of a strange person, really, just on my own. Working. I mean, I could never imagine being like teaching a big group of people, because I could hardly speak to someone who came to visit the studio. I was so like in the zone, but it just felt like the place that I felt safe. It felt like home when I was making work, and working, looking at natural materials, carving, plaster carving, wood, painting these forms. They were educating me, they were speaking to me. And then the teaching was just, I don't know how that happened. And there's just such a beautiful cycle that comes from teaching and seeing people, introducing people to this world and then seeing them flourish. Like, it's a real honor. And I keep thinking I'm going to get back into my own work, and then something like this happens, like these Zoom classes, and like, okay, let's just do this. Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of the beginning process you talked about, but I wonder, and I know there are a few questions about that as well. What is your routine now? How do you manage to do, you were talking about 6 months of work, but now, for example, you're really busy and you run lots of workshops and classes. What's your routine as an artist, and how do you divide your time?
Well, that's a great question. Maybe I don't have the same. I don't have the time, and I'm so glad that I spent the time in my youth honing those skills rather than partying all the time, because there's no time when you get older. There's very little time to just really dedicate hours and hours. When you've got a little one. And I just so I mean, now I have a lot of projects. We're putting this book together. I've got a couple, maybe 2 or 3 books, and a few commissions. There's a mural in Dubai, and classes, and my own projects that I'd like to work on. I have these. I'm very interested in portholes and spirals, and this particular Drusk effect, it's called. It was used by Escher. And I want to see if there are sacred proportions that I can imbibe in those forms and biomorphic shapes. So I still have the fire, but I also feel my responsibilities as a teacher and a parent and a friend, and so it's balancing all these things. And I also quite like to live in the flow, right? I want to live in the flow. So I don't want to be, it's the thing about making art is that it comes to you, and when it comes, it's really easy. It just comes and you do it, and you're like, whoa, was that it? I was expecting, the real inspiration. So you can't really force it. And when you do, that's when there's a little bit of ego in there. So you've got to be careful as an artist, like not to be like, "Whoa, I'm going to make this."
I agree.
So when it comes, it works. And so I just wait. I'm just happy, grateful to be in this world.
It's good if you can manage. So there's another question about your work. Is your work mostly about studying existing patterns and their scripts, or about creating new patterns and forms?
Yeah, so my own work, I like to create new patterns. I'm inspired. I want to bring something new, and I want to contribute, right, to the world learning and this beautiful civilizations that we live in. When it comes to the teaching, I think people prefer to learn work from antiquity, and relate it to the ancient monuments, and so I tend to teach existing works. Sometimes I adapt them a little bit, make them more accessible.
A question from Christine. Your father seems to have been a great influence on you. What work have you done with him together collaboratively?
My father is a great influence. He was a carpenter and a calligrapher, and he's always been present, a fantastic source of practical knowledge. Whenever I've had struggles on really demanding projects, he's been there. We built a shepherd's hut together. He helped me build a shepherd's hut for a little home for myself last year or the year before, and many sculptural projects. He's been there. He's in his own right. He's a bit of a sculptor in the kind of like Brancusi, Osamu Noguchi sort of vein, and he's got a very good eye. So he's always been there. And my mum too. Bless her. She's a great muse, and she was a poet, and they've been always an inspiration to me. Very grateful to them.
Glad to hear about your background. Actually, I didn't know myself, and I'm sure everyone was interested about that. Adam. Actually, we're running a little bit time. Thanks for your presentation. It's inspiring, as always. I think it's kind of time to say goodbye. We have loads of questions.
Yes.
I couldn't get them to you. Hopefully, I'll kind of copy these questions and forward them to you.
Of course, yeah.
If you're interested to maybe answer them through your social media account, maybe Instagram account. So I will be directing these questions to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Zainab, and thank you everyone. Thanks for joining, and it's a real pleasure. Feel free to contact me to reach out on Instagram or some other way, or join some of the classes. You can join them for free if you like. Hopefully hopefully you learned something from today, and I'm honored that you came to join me. Okay, take care everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.